ooh, like this had an NC-17 rating, like maybe things are going to be kind of hot. and I, like 30 minutes in, I was like, okay, I am back in like the Lower East Side, and I am going to Ontological Hysterical or the Worcester Group. Like, I am back in performance art world, and that's a part of my world that I love. But I wasn't. My expectations were very different. I'm very happy that I saw it, and I'm not going to be able to forget it. Hey, listeners, Chris here. We don't usually do this direct address stuff here at the beginning of the show, but we have two things that we wanted to say. First of all, we'd love to give out a big thanks and a shout out to Leah Jones over at the Finding Favorites podcast. Leah has had both me and Jesse on her show, and it's been a big privilege for both of us. For those of you that haven't experienced Finding Favorites, it's a great show during which Leah has an old school conversation with someone about their favorite thing. Just cruising through the feed of her show is intriguing. You could learn about writing, cycling, powerlifting, Shabbat stews, and making movies just in the last 5 episodes. Leah is an excellent interviewer, which is an incredibly difficult skill. A good interviewer manages to get a guest to open up and then lets that guest be the star of the show. You'll come away from Leah's shows with a new knowledge about something you didn't even know you found interesting. She plays our Season 2 trailer in her own Thanksgiving interlude episode, which came out a few days ago. Just in 13 minutes, you'll hear about the new Chicago cast of Hamilton, what's going on with the How Did This Get Made podcast, and her reactions to the unfolding horror in the Middle East. Our second update is a warning. The film we are discussing today is graphic and covers many topics listeners might find unsettling. So, here is a content warning for Peter Greenaway's The Cook, the Thief, his wife, and her lover. We cover topics such as murder, torture, sexual assault, prostitution, misogyny, albinism, and cannibalism. If any of those topics are upsetting, or if you have younger ears you'd like to protect, we wanted you to know that they are coming. Other than that, we hope that you enjoy this show. Thanks for listening.
Oh, it's funny. I hear your voice in my ear right now because I'm previewing the audio meme that I made. There's 2 Chris bags. 1 Chris bag too many.
Yeah, that's a lot of Chris bags. That's quite a bit. I can't believe
your baggage of bags. A sack of bags.
A double of bags. An extra of bags. Yeah, these can keep going.
I like a sack of bags. Are you one of those people who has a bag of bags in your kitchen?
Yes, I do.
Yes, so it would be bags, bag of bags.
Yes, it would be bags, bag of bags. Bagadooch.
Yeah, bagadooch.
I can't believe you're feeling a little low energy on our way into discussing this movie, this film, this. I don't know what this is, but I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Indeed. You know what? Let me finish. I was just about to upload this meme to Facebook, so let me finish my now. Then you're gonna be like, "Wait, I have one thing I need to do," and I'll be ready, and you'll be like, "Wait, let me just finish." Here, I'll do it. Chris Bag and I discuss how 2 great authors may make different choices. I think that's good enough. The meme is the part where we riff on how Andy Weir would have saved the cat.
Oh my god!
And
I love that part.
Yeah, that was a very good episode.
Holy shit!
Very good.
That was one of our best.
It's very good. Even the ramble at the beginning, I think, had a fluidity to it, a kind of improv fluidity that was great. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe we should just get into it if we don't have an opening bit. One thing I will say is that for about the last 5 years, I have conflated Michael Gambon and Max von Sydow in my brain. I was like, oh yeah,
I don't know who that is. Max von
Sydow is a Swedish actor, and maybe the reason I conflate them is Michael Gambon sounds like a French name. Max von Sydow was the father in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. He was the villain in Minority Report.
Okay.
He's excellent. And when Michael Gambon died earlier this year, they were like, "Oh, Dumbledore died," and I'm like, "Dumbledore? That's all you can associate this guy with? Like, what about the diving bell and the butterfly? What about?" I mean, and I still feel that way. Although, you know, it's a little bit less so now. You know, even though this is obviously an iconic role for him, it's not necessarily as famous a film as, say, 4 Harry Potter movies.
And you know, I mean, just a cavalcade of other stuff. I saw him in a stage play. I saw him in Art, the Yasmina Reza hit in the early 90s. Another one of the like weird things that my mom took me to see, which is kind of amazing. I feel like she sort of played cultural darts, and like sometimes we hit and sometimes we really missed, and I'm glad I saw it because it was Michael Gambon and Alan Alda and another like lion of either the American or British theater, and they were great.
Did Alan Alda do a lot of stage work?
Yeah, he did.
I guess that makes sense because his filmography start after MASH is good but thin. Mm-hmm. It's like he's in like 6 movies and he's great in all of them.
But yeah, I think he did a lot of film stuff, stage stuff. I hated Art. I think it's a terrible play. And
this movie we're going to talk about would also be one that I would have second thoughts about showing to my child.
Yeah. I have questions
at any age
for you.
Like if I had a 40-year-old child and I was 65, I don't know that I would take my 40-year-old child.
I have a question for you. That's
like you might want to watch this on your own. And then if you're disturbed about it and there's anything we need to talk about, let's have that conversation. But yeah,
I have questions for you about like sharing it with your friends and
No, I mean I you know what, I added a content warning to the episode that comes before this for that reason. I don't know that all of our listeners will want to watch this, and I wouldn't blame somebody who doesn't want to watch this. It's very disturbing, although I think it is worth watching.
Yeah, me too.
But maybe we should get in the recap then. I mean, we're right into it. Maybe I'll start us.
Go for it.
Which was this mysterious. I'll start at you. The movie starts amazingly, where the screen is dark and tinted red, and you hear the sounds of dogs eating meat.
Yes.
And then you see a bunch of dogs eating sort of meaty bones, and then there's a sort of tracking shot that goes up a scaffold, and you're like, what, are we in an opera house? Are we in a theater? And I don't even know that question is ever answered, but at some point you become aware that you're oddly both in the front and the back of a restaurant outside, because you can see the name of the restaurant, but the door opens to the kitchen, which I find very odd. And then 2 trucks pull up. We're not going to go this level of detail of the whole movie, but this opening thing is sort of incredible. These 2 seafood trucks pull up, and then a third car pulls right between them. Everything is beautifully symmetric. And Albert Spica and his goons get out. Albert is the thief of the title. This is, by the way, the cook, the thief, his wife, and her lover. And he immediately starts torturing a man who owes him money, beating him, stripping him, smearing dog feces on him. And then his wife, Georgina, who is in the car looking on, clearly doesn't like to see this. At some point objects to the torture, and they finally go inside, and they go through the kitchen, and we meet the cook, the titular cook, Richard, and he is plucking a goose and causing the air around him to look like a winter scene with goose feathers. And we're in this enormous kitchen that I don't think you can even see the ceilings. It is like an industrial loft-sized kitchen with people doing all sorts of food preps.
Bertolt Brecht designed a kitchen,
right, and or Caravaggio painted a kitchen, right? You know, it looks medieval, it looks ancient, and to add to the ancient medieval quality, there is a boy soprano singing in the dish pit, and we're tracked into the kitchen, and we get a sense that there's tension between Albert, who is maybe the money, and Richard, who is the genius French cook. The cook doesn't approve of the torture we see because once Albert's gone, he helps the poor guy who was covered in feces. And then the cook and his wife, the thief and his wife go into the dining room. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, we get a lot of Spica and his goons sort of being oafish in the restaurant. The way that
Spica doesn't shut up.
Never.
He is never silent.
In terms of a performance, this is absolutely incredible for Michael Gambon, who manages to be completely awful and never stops talking. And it's really quite amazing. The movie has a real play-like feel, and you forget that it probably wasn't done all in one shot, but it really feels like it was. And Spica sort of assaults your senses the entire time with just this never-ending speech. He talks so much, he berates the guests, he berates his men, that he misses the fact that his wife, Georgina, is kind of flirting across the room with a bookish chap who returns the flirtation. They kind of head off to the bathroom. There is a little bit of coyness as she doesn't really want to go through with it at first and returns to her chair. He returns to his chair. Then she decides that they are going to have a tryst. They have sex in the ladies' room. They are almost caught by Spica, who comes into the bathroom and is awful. And this pattern repeats. The plot structure of the movie is that every night Spica and his men and Georgina come to the restaurant, and we get a view of what is on the menu that night in this sort of beautiful French menu style. And every night things are sort of repeated, but the tryst continues to build in intensity, and the kitchen staff helps this tryst go on because everybody kind of hates Spica. And so the cook, Ricard, and Pup, the porter, and the dish boy, and all of the other members of the staff help Michael. We learn what his name is after they speak to each other after they have had sex a few times. And
in fact, it is Spica who causes them to speak to one another, where he starts harassing Michael and invites him to the table and is sort of harassing him. Although Michael conducts himself very admirably in that situation, considering that he's being harassed by a very scary gangster.
Eventually, the cat is let out of the bag by a young woman who is a prostitute and is part of this entourage. Albert insults her, and she tells on Georgina, and I will kick it back to you.
So somehow the cook, I think, Richard, figures this out, and Georgina and Michael, he helps them he kind of spirits them out of the restaurant and then away in this truck. And we now realize that the truck has been sitting there for a week because it apparently Spica stole these two food trucks, but Richard refused to use the food inside. It's an interesting echo of the movie Blood Simple by the Coen brothers. So these like fish and lobsters have been sitting in this truck rotting for a week, and there's maggots, and of course they have to be smuggled out of there, and so it smells ghastly. But this takes them to this book depository, which I think Michael has access to, and then Pup, the boy soprano dish kid, brings them food. And so they have this, they've got away safely, and Georgina is now free of the monstrous thief, her husband, Albert. But unfortunately, Pup is intercepted by Albert and the goons, and he's tortured. And Albert, I guess I don't know if Albert, your note says that, like, oh yeah, he figures out essentially Pup has some books on them and they all have a stamp of this particular address, and so Albert's able to figure this out. Georgina goes to the hospital when she hears that Pup has been hurt. While she's in the hospital, the goons and Albert break in and they torture Michael to death by shoving ripped pages from his books down his own throat, which is gruesome. It's depicted very quickly, fortunately. And then, well, why don't you finish this out?
Yeah. So Georgina comes back to the book depository, and bzzz,
and this is heavy spoilers,
yeah.
y'all.
Big spoilers.
If you think you might watch this one day, you're going to want to skip like the next minute, because you do want this to be a surprise, I think.
So the first thing she does is she realizes Michael is dead, but still spends the night next to his corpse in this very strange and unsettling. She kind of does this pageantry thing. You get the sense she knows he's dead. You don't think she's crazy, but she says, like, everything is going to be fine. You're going to wake up in the morning. We'll go back to the way that it was. Of course, that doesn't happen.
She's mourning, essentially.
Yeah. She goes to Ricard, the cook, and asks him to cook Michael. And he is resistant and he won't do it. And then she tells him why she wants him to do it. She offers to pay him. He turns down the money. And he assents because her plan is that she is going to feed Michael to Spica. This happens because the entire staff of the restaurant sort of corners Spica. His goon squad has sort of depleted over the course of the film.
Some of them even switch sides.
Yeah. You get the sense that he's really gone too far.
He's been bullying all of them, really. And
they wrestle a gun away from him, and like any bully, he is terrified. And Georgina holds a gun on him and forces him to eat a bite of Michael, her lover. And then she shoots him.
Michael à l'orange?
Michael à l'orange.
I don't know. What is that? What is that dish?
You're right.
Some kind of, it's like a glazed duck sort of dish, right? Yeah.
Very graphic.
Yes.
We see Michael's glazed and poached member kind of standing, not quite erect,
Indeed.
but innate, right there in
very prominent,
in front of Spica. Very, very prominent. This didn't end up NC-17 or X. This was given an unrated rating here in the States. And you get there is a lot of fairly graphic violence and nudity.
I think in the late 80s when it came out, we would have said it's a very European film.
Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah. That is the end. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just get into it. My first question for you, that opening shot, do you think we are seeing the set? Do you think that we are meant to see the scaffolding of the light rigs and the set, or do you think that is supposed to somehow be part of the environment that this story is set in?
I think we are. I think this is too intentionally expressionistic. Like it's really got the feeling of German expressionist art or theater. It is very performative. It is way closer to an opera than a movie, or a film or a play. All of the action is writ large. It's all like most opera. It is all referent and also just pure action at the same time. It is.
I mean,
both,
I think with one distinction is that perhaps you wouldn't expect such good acting from an opera.
Yeah, exactly.
And that might be the one difference. But I think I agree, and I think that the thing that it has in common with an opera, the storyline is very simple.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily see the personal growth or whatever. It's sort of like we know what this story is, and the point of watching it is the sensual pleasure. In the case of an opera, that is usually the incredible performance of the opera singers' voices in a beautiful space. I think in this case, it includes that because we have the boy soprano, but I think it is the oil painting like delicious visuals of this film. I think that is what stands in for the operatic voices, is the visuals of the movie are just stunning. The only director I can think of who comes close to this kind of visual expression is Stanley Kubrick, and in fact, it's the film. The visuals really remind me of Kubrick. Particularly, there's a lot of primary colors, a lot of red, a lot of black, a lot of blue, a lot of symmetry, a lot of compositions that look like oil paintings, sort of like Barry Lyndon. And in that sense, I think, we talked about how with, say, the movie Boyhood, time replaces plot. I think in this movie, visual beauty replaces plot. I mean, there is a plot, but it's not a particularly complex, surprising, interesting plot.
Yeah, this is another one where archetype and beauty stand in for traditional storytelling stuff, and I think that's the point. It's almost all allegory or parable. It's like Hieronymus Bosch and the guy who directed Drive got together and made a movie. I can't pronounce that guy's name. Nicholas Winding Refn or something. Refn, something like that.
Nicholas Winding Refn.
Yeah, I kept thinking to myself that.
No, that's a very good reference, right? Yeah.
Like in the same way that if without the fall you don't have pavement, without this movie you both don't have Nicholas Winding Refn, and you also don't have Wes Anderson.
Oh yeah, interesting. What I would say though is without Barry Lyndon and without The Shining, you don't have this movie.
Yeah, I think you're right. Totally. Yeah, it's
In fact, this movie is like merging Barry Lyndon in The Shining into one movie, and then like adding Reservoir Dogs, which actually came out a little bit later, but
and also
including
Tim Roth.
Tim Roth. Right? No, this was the era of Tim Roth, and it's like if you see Tim Roth, you know that the movie is going to be well made, and you know that you might feel nauseated at some point in the course of watching the film from this particular era. Bad things always happen when Tim Roth.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly.
Particularly in this era, like ears get cut off, people lose their fingers, children get their belly buttons cut out. Terrible things happen when Tim Roth appears in a movie. Yeah.
Swinging.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern
both die.
Yeah. Terribly unfairly.
I really. I mean, that opening track, that opening shot, I was like, oh my God, we're in a Wes Anderson movie. And then, I mean, so many moments like that. I mean, the
saddest
the saddest and darkest I mean, what's interesting is that it makes some of those Wes Anderson throwaway moments in like Rushmore that you get the joke. You're like, oh, like those like he's sort of aping this movie. He's with those moments with the sort of like wildly over the top, very stylized everything. Visuals, cinematography, acting. I mean, it's very funny. I'd never heard of this movie. Did you know that there's a Bob's Burgers episode called The Cook, the Steve, His Gail, and Her Lover?
No, I don't actually. I've never seen Bob's Burgers, but that sounds amazing. Just the fact that like a comedy show would like pastiche this film is incredible.
And it's they did it. I was wondering. I was like, is it going to be like a wholesale kind of like ripoff? And it's It isn't, but there is like vomit and a rib roast that kind of goes like awry, and it does homage in like a nice way.
Yeah. Who's the protagonist of this film?
When I saw this question on there, I was like, oh, fuck. I was intrigued by the beginning because the person they are shoving the feces in that person's mouth looks so much like Michael. It is a very, very visual sort of call out. And I was wondering, is this a cyclical movie? Like, has Georgina done this before? We kind of know that guy is getting beaten up because he stole from Spica. It's a little hard to understand, but I that's the sense that I got. I don't think Georgina is the protagonist. She's kind of the one that you would imagine, but like, she is responsible for Michael's death, I would say. I mean, they are equally culpable, but yeah, I don't.
Well,
think,
I mean, I did. Okay, continue,
yeah, I don't think she's the protagonist. Maybe it's Ricard. Maybe it's the chef. But I mean, he's
the most
the action
sympathetic
forward. He's the kindest.
He's the kindest character. The first thing we see him do is clean the dog shit off the poor man. And he always stands up to Albert Spica, despite Spica's power over him. He always helps whoever needs it. He is innately kind, even though he is, the master of his domain, the chef in the kitchen. The argument for Georgina, I think, is the most classical argument, which is that she is kind of like a slave when the story starts. She has this experience of pleasure, which we do understand, I think, is an escape for her, a needed escape. Michael's not a catch by any, but you know what I mean? But at the same time, he is interested in her. He's kind. He's bold. They have their affair. And that is a form of liberation, I think, for Georgina. That brings about his death. And his death brings about the end of her paralysis. And she is then willing to take action against, her tormentor, Albert. So in that structural sense, I think she is the protagonist. But I don't feel like we're in her point of view ever. I think we're watching. And I think, this gets back to, the very first shot. And so also, not only do we see that tracking shot, we also see the two sort of like servers pull the curtains back as though the filmmaker is saying, you are watching a play.
Yeah.
And you notice the set of the street out in front, very obviously are boards. Yeah. Like it looks like a theater out front. And so you have this sense, and even the camera angles, the tracking, it always feels like you're maybe, there are tracking shots of a kind you wouldn't see when you're watching a play, but it's as though you're sitting in the theater tracking your eyes across the stage that's been laid in front of you. And even the way the scenes change when you go from the kitchen to the dining room, or the dining room to the bathrooms, it's almost like a scene change, like curtain down, curtain up. We're in a different place, because what you do is you sort of go into the wall, everything gets dark, and then you emerge in this space that looks totally different. Curtain down, curtain comes back up, suddenly we're in a different place. And it's pretty incredible. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask that question. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if this story has a protagonist. I don't know if it's a very good story, even. I mean, do you think this is a good story? And I don't mean that's different than is it a good film?
Right.
No,
it's not a good story, but it's not trying to be. Like it's like with anything, like with any kind of expressionism, like it's the interplay of what everything in here represents. And it is so like weighted with symbolism, and the closest, as you were talking, I was kind of like, okay, well, what are the ideas here that are sort of held up as like good things or safe spaces? And it's kind of books. Like there's a real interplay, a tension between speaking, which is pretty much speakas. I mean, it's like it's in his freaking name. It's pretty much his territory, where all he does is speak and bloviate and just fill the world here with really violent and oafish rhetoric. And that is set against Michael, who is quiet and thoughtful and bookish. So we have a classic like speaking, reading thing. Books always stand in for knowledge. Okay, once we were talking about knowledge and eating things, we are in, Garden of Eden territory. We're in the fall. Once we're talking about the Garden of Eden, we're talking about sex. We're talking about being expelled. And pretty quickly, this movie starts to take on like a pretty heavy allegorical weight.
Heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Or Eden,
I mean,
Eden in the
there
world.
There is a swinging pig's head that obscures our main characters' heads when they are in like the most hellish environment on their way to a place of peace, which might be Inferno, might be Purgatorio. It's the late 80s in England. Like, it's not a great time when this movie is being made for the filmmaker and its society. I mean, I think this is a classic ideas. I mean, it's so Brechtian. The actors know that we know that the actors know that they're acting.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Well, what do you think about the performances then? Like, I mean, normally I would say a self-conscious performance is a bad performance, right?
Well, I mean, that's the cool thing about like Brechtian acting is that it is you don't go there for the realistic acting performances. You go there for the kind of operatic bigness of the human experience. And that's what is supposed to be happening. I find all of these performances stilted in a very interesting way. Like they're all doing the thing they're supposed to be doing and doing it very, very well. And again, it makes me think of Drive, that the acting notes that the director gives Ryan Gosling in that movie is probably like, hey man, next scene, I want you to do nothing.
I see that. What do you think about the moment when Helen Mirren's character Georgina talks about being, sort of sexually molested by Albert, her husband? Because that might be an exception.
Yeah.
It's much quieter than the rest of the performances.
And that happens when they're in the book repository. I believe. I think it's in the book repository.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. The other option would be the when they're in sort of a cage that's full of hanging vegetables and fruits, and it's a very intimate moment too. But I think it's in the book repository. Yeah, that's sort of the beating heart of the movie, because it's the only time they're safe, and they're safe for like such a small amount of time, and she can kind of unbuckle her armor, and that's another piece, I think, of the conceit here, that like she moves to a more realistic acting style in this moment where she can, and everything else, like it really is. I mean, it's like kabuki theater. It is very stylized except for that moment. And even though I don't find the performances realistic, I find them impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Gambon is hard. It's hard. His performance is magnetic, but it's also, I'm glad this is over. I don't want to see any more of this. Mm-hmm. He's so terrible.
He's awful.
And to a point where it's sort of like, again, I don't know if it's a very good story because there's nothing complicated about his character. Yeah. And in fact, the most the moment when he is terrified, that is an interesting moment because I think it implicates the viewer in a kind of revenge fantasy, which I think is interesting because what is a bully doing but taking revenge on the people who have hurt him? I think this is one of the great themes of Game of Thrones and why I really liked the ending of Game of Thrones and most people didn't. I was like, yeah, we're seeing a monster being created out of somebody who's not a monster. That's and that process, it's not like people are born evil. Right. And so, but that question isn't really addressed, I think if you wanted to do an interesting story about Albert Spica the gangster, you would maybe allude to some of his childhood or whatever happened to him that made him decide that he needs to be the terror in other people's lives. Yeah. 2 questions about food. Yeah. Would you want to eat at this restaurant? No. Say more about that.
I mean, it's not a restaurant. It's a place of ideas. And I mean, what you said about the different sets is so true. The different sets don't have any connection to each other. Each space feels wildly different. The characters' costumes change color depending on which set they are in the particular moment. I mean, it's a lurid fantasy. It's Lynchian. It is, and because of that,
not quite, but I know what you mean. Right,
yeah, we're really,
it's on the Lynch spectrum.
Exactly. Yeah.
Somewhere between Kubrick and Lynch.
No, I would be totally weirded out to eat in this restaurant. You hear.
Even if Albert Spica weren't there harassing everybody, in that situation,
this restaurant doesn't.
It doesn't exist.
That
would certainly be better, right? Right.
This restaurant doesn't exist with Albert Spica. The entire thing is an ecosystem. It exists only in this space.
It's like his chamber of hell.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Although, okay, well, I just thought of something too, though, which is that Michael quite likes it there. Yeah. You talked about what do the various characters have in common. I think there is a bond between Michael the lover, Richard the cook, and Georgina. One thing that is explicit is they all enjoy the food and they have a similar palate. And Richard even says to Albert, "It's always a pleasure to serve your wife." Yeah. Which is in Albert, I think Albert plays this very well. The one thing, the characterization of Albert is excellent because he is both proud of his wife and degrades her and fiercely jealous. And so when Richard the cook compliments his wife, he is both pleased by the compliment and jealous of her palate, and then pours a bunch of port wine and other stuff in one of her dishes to sort of ruin it and to kind of mock her palate. But I do think that is kind of interesting. I'm curious, what do you think this movie? Is this a foodie film? Does it have something to say about food?
Yes, but the food only stands in for appetite. And as you were just pointing out, how the different classes of the characters interact with it. Spica doesn't understand the food, and Georgina and Michael and Richard do. And we are meant to draw some kind of classist argument about that. And I don't think it's about, just like I don't think any of the stuff in this movie is not about the stuff. It is all about power. It makes me think of the David Mamet line, everything is about sex except sex, which is about power. And this movie really trades in that. You know, the sex stuff is about power. The food stuff is about sex. And it's yeah, I don't think it is. I'm trying to think of an example where like something so central to a work is not about itself, that it's about whatever the director is trying, whatever point the director is trying to get across. And you know, this was an interesting watching experience. I'm not going to say that I like loved this. I am glad I saw it, and I thought about it. I've been thinking about it pretty consistently since I watched it, because it's strange and over the top and very different. And it really pushes on the limits of film. And I really value it for that. And the performances are incredible, and the cinematography is wild, and it's really a worthwhile watch. I don't know if I enjoyed myself. But I don't think it's about food. I think the food provides a helpful... You couldn't do it without the food.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'm thinking about a lot, too, in this movie is there are a lot of human bodily functions in fluids on display. And that's also Albert's favorite topic. Just about everything he is talking about has something to do with, like, sex or, you know, defecation or sweat or what smells like what, or all of these other, fertility. And one of the things I noticed, I mean, the way that Michael seduces or flirts with Georgina is in the way that he is eating. And at one point, he sort of looks at her and then takes a very lusty bite of whatever he's eating and stares right at her, as if to say, you know, I wish to possess you in the same way. And, you know, it's not mean, it's not seductive. It is to suggest that she is just as delicious as whatever it is that he's eating, although we don't even know what he's eating. But I also think about, you know, they end up having a lot of sex in the kitchen, like in the same place that, like, the bread is being stored and the vegetables. And, you know, like, sex can be kind of gross, you know? Like, I don't want people having sex in the kitchen where my food is being prepared. I don't want that to happen, not unless they're going to do a really good job cleaning it up. And you know, the first thing we see is, like, dog feces, and we see the fish rotting and all of this other stuff. It does also seem to be saying something that actually there's a moment of similarity. There's a moment of resonance with Babette's Feast. Like, you know, there's sometimes movies where you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, we're in this other movie for a second. And I feel like in Babette's Feast, when you see the cow's head and the dead quails, it's like we're suddenly in the Cook the Thief, his wife and her lover, for like just a minute.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what I mean? And that's the one thing that they have in common, which is an awareness, and I think this is also very French, is that an awareness that cooking, particularly if you're using meats, is earthy, animalistic, even dirty. Yeah. Even there's an element of it that can feel a little bit profane, even though you're creating something that's sort of beautiful, right? And like one of like the soup cook is constantly shirtless. Yes. Like I'm sure there's some oil painting that's based on, right? Like some 16th century painting of like a bald guy stirring a cauldron or something like that. But it's like, why doesn't he put a shirt on? I don't want his chest hairs to fall into the soup, you know? Like he might drip some sweat. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit squeamish, but I did just... It felt like we were being constantly asked to imagine what things tasted and smelled like, and including delicious things, but also terribly disgusting things as well, like vomit or the cooked Michael. And what's the last thing that Albert does before he is killed is vomits, you know, before he takes a bite of Michael and then is killed.
Yeah, this film never lets you. The difference I'd say between this and Babette's Feast is like Babette's Feast, we see the animals dying or dead, but this movie reminds us that food turns into shit, and that it also, if unused, that it rots and that it becomes unusable. And it's all, yeah, again, like we're in ideas world again, but Peter Greenaway is sticking to the no ideas but in things. Like he is focused entirely on the things here. And what's Albert? He's a thief. What's Ricard? He's a cook. What is this guy? He has to eat shit. Like what is Georgina?
Yep.
The wife. And the adulterer. There are books. Michael is killed by having to eat the pages of his favorite book. Like it's all things that then profess the ideas of the film. And I think that's why that opening tracking shot, we see scaffolds. What do scaffolds do? Scaffolds hold things up. They exist in the real world, but we also use scaffolding as a way of like talking about rhetoric. That like you build your argument with scaffolding. Like I think Peter Greenaway, like he's like, yep, I know exactly what. I'm not going to tell a story. I'm going to tell an idea.
Do you think there is actually an argument, or is it just an assemblage of latent rich symbolism sort of all laid out in front of you in a gloriously beautiful and occasionally profane way?
I think he is like working in the kind of like grand like Judeo-Christian tradition. This is a very big idea film, and that we're talking about all the big stuff. We're talking about sin. We're talking about knowledge. We're talking about leaving the garden. We're talking about death. We're talking about hell. We're talking about heaven. We can stay there. We can do a social reading and again be like, okay, late 1980s, there are big class conflicts going on in England at the time. Yeah, I mean, we could do that, or it just could be like this wild, strange romp through this weird funhouse. And I kind of like that it could be all those things.
But okay, so I mean, I agree that we're certainly talking about all those things, but then I guess my question is does he say anything about those things? Like, okay, if we're talking about Sartre, right? Hell is other people. We're not just talking about hell. Or if we're Star Wars, there is good in everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody is redeemable. Mm-hmm. That is it's about good and evil, but there is a message, which is that everybody is redeemable, and love, in fact, has the power to redeem anybody at any point in their life. That's the message of Star Wars. And whether it's the love of friendship that can turn an irascible, smuggler rogue into a loyal companion, or whether it's the love of a father for a son, which causes him to finally, overthrow the master who's held him in thrall for all these years. Is there a statement like that that you could ascertain from this film? That doesn't have to be. I'm just curious. I'm curious if he's saying anything or if he's just painting. Not to say that you can't say something with your painting.
Yeah. I'm kind of reminded of, I can't remember who this quote is attributed to, but a poem is about something in the same way that a cat is about the house. And I think that, I mean, that's perfect. If you leaned on me, I would say that this movie wants to be about the distinction between speechifying and thinking. Where Spica stands for sort of bloviation and specious arguments and resentment and bullying. and books and knowledge, sex stands in for knowledge as well, is better, but it's not a perfect dichotomy. Like nothing is really good here, but knowledge and connection is better than bloviation.
Yeah. Well, again, the cook is probably the most unmistakably good character. And he sees a kindred spirit in Georgina and Michael and helps them. Not just because they're pitiful, but also, I think, because he recognizes... It's interesting that you said that that's classist. I have a whole thought around, sort of related, about the relationship of taste and class. As somebody who often has, for much of my life, has not had more than a couple dollars to rub together, but has always prided myself perhaps in having better taste than many people who are quite a bit wealthier than me. But then sort of wondering if, like, is that my own version of class that I'm doing? Am I just kind of, and lots of people do this, right? This is basically the definition of hipster. Somebody whose self-worth comes from their taste as opposed to their material, and even sense of class. And I'm calling myself out for that. But I could go to trivia now. Do you have any other questions? Okay.
Yeah. I have an important one for you.
Okay.
Can you locate the middleness of this movie for me?
When are we in? Does that mean when we're in the middle?
No, the upper middle browness of this.
Oh.
I mean, this film strikes me as almost... it's hard for me to say, but it really does seem to sit in the sort of like upper tranches of the works we consider. Like, you've really got to come to this movie with your like critical faculties in place, and that's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, was this a widely popular film? I know it did fairly well. It won a lot of awards. But I'm wondering, like, what about this strikes you as, as middlebrow?
Good question. Okay. Well, so my cop-out answer, I have two cop-out answers. Cop-out answer number one. Cop-out answer number one is that upper middlebrow sounds like a shelf, a place on a shelf, but it's really more about our positionality vis-a-vis art, which is, and sort of the belief that anything that is sort of perceived as pulpy or pleasurable should be discussed with the same rigor as something that is elevated, but that also the discussion of that which is elevated should be just as pleasurable as the discussion of that which is pulpy. So that thing sort of cuts both ways. So, but that's a cop-out. That's the justification for talking about it for our podcast. The more serious answer is, well, you know what? I'll tell you. So I can, if I was given the chance to design the afterlife, paradise would be something kind of like the McDowell colony, but near the ocean. I would not have a hell. But then for people who are sort of in, I would have a kind of pleasant version of purgatory, which also would be for people who kind of burned out on paradise, because I think you can burn out on anything. And my model for the sort of happy purgatory, a sort of Bardo-like space, is Clemens Library, the undergraduate library at the University of Virginia, which is a very warm, comforting space with like somnambulant, loud radiators and a rule where you're not really supposed to talk on many of the floors. And in the 1990s, when I was there were like 50 it has a very good media library. So there were 50 little like TVs with VCRs and DVD players where you could go check out a movie from the reserve and watch it on this very comfortable couch. And I spent many a happy hour as an undergraduate with like a plastic set of headphones plugged into a headphone amp watching, and often it would be like the big 12-inch pre-DVD.
Oh, yeah,
like
I remember those. the huge laser
so you
discs.
get one of those. Like it's as big as a vinyl record, and you would take it and stick it in, and then halfway through you had to open it up and flip it over because they could only have about 40 minutes. And so sometime when I was 18 or 19, I watched this movie.
I was wondering if you'd seen it before.
Yes, I have. And I feel like every time I was in there, somebody was watching The Godfather. Every time. Someone would always be watching The Godfather. I do remember watching this movie and being like, man, there's a lot of nudity in here. And I'm like in this room with a lot of people. It is a little bit pulpy. The sex is very, very, very explicit.
Oh, yeah.
And what's interesting, watching it this time, Helen Mirren is beautiful, and yet, in watching it this time, it was very clear and surprising to me how clearly she is a middle-aged woman. I don't remember that from the first viewing. I think because when I was 18 or 19, I probably had never seen so much nudity in my life, and that in and of itself was kind of shocking and surprising, and it made an impression on me, I think, at the time, and in a way was a sort of like, welcome to adulthood. You're an adult now. You can check out a movie at your undergraduate library and watch naked people for hours. Which feels very naive. And, it's not pornographic, and it's not even, I don't find the sex to be even particularly pleasurable to watch. I don't find it to be particularly erotic.
I don't think it's supposed to be.
It feels realistic, but it feels
fleshy.
Desperate.
Desperate
and fleshy, and you might be happy that these two people found each other, maybe, although it comes to a tragic end. So I guess my best answer to that question is that it probably isn't really upper middle brow based on your definition, but if it were to be, it is certainly a very lurid film, and lurid has a kind of pulpy quality. So perhaps that. But again, my cop-out answer is that upper middle brow is more what we do rather than being sort of a shelf. So my friends have this podcast called Nerdette. It's now just hosted by Greta, and they always used to say nerdette could be a noun, but we like to use it as a verb, and that anybody can be a nerd or nerdette about anything. And I think in the same way, you and I have a particular way about considering and thinking about works of culture. That is upper middle brow.
Awesome.
The way that we think and talk about it, and we can apply it to anything we want.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'm satisfied. Upper middle brow it is.
Shall we do some trivia?
Let's do it. Let's go there.
Okay. I think you went first last time.
Okay. Yes, that is correct.
So you may have looked this up, and I wouldn't blame you, but Helen Mirren and Michael Gambon share at least one other acting credit together that I'm aware of. There might be others. They were both in a late 1970s production of the Royal Shakespeare Company. I'm not sure which theater, but it was the Royal Shakespeare Company, in which they also played major characters who are in a contentious relationship. Was the play Antony and Cleopatra? A, Antony and Cleopatra, in which they were the titular characters. B, The Taming of the Shrew, in which Gambon plays Petruchio and Mirren plays Caterina. C, The Merchant of Venice, in which Gambon plays Shylock and Mirren plays Portia. Or D, the Royal Shakespeare Theatre's production of The Moat in God's Eye, in which Gambon plays Horace Hussein Bury and Mirren plays Lady Sandra Bright Fowler.
Ooh. Oh, this is tough because they were basically company members at the RSC for a long time.
So they may have had other credits together too.
Okay,
if it turns out you pick one that I was mistaken about, but it is true, I'll give you a retro ding.
Credit. Merchant of Venice, Taming of the Shrew, or Antony and Cleopatra. I'm going to go with Antony and Cleopatra.
You got it!
Yes! My reasoning on this one. They are very serious actors. Like, they've done comedies, and I'm sure that they have played those roles. But that is, and for that particular time in their career, they would have been perfectly suited to be that. You know, like they would be getting, like, all right, guys, this season you guys get Antony and Cleopatra, and next season you get Hamlet and Ophelia. Like,
right,
you know.
right. I could see Shylock and Portia.
Yeah.
I think, particularly since Mirren was about the right age, you know, in the late 1970s, and Gambon could definitely
pull it
be
off.
Shylock.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
oh my God!
But
a correct answer.
Yeah, yeah, and you thought your way into it
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
All right.
I thought you would like that.
Well, I
one.
also have a question about the actors and the other work that they've done. I went the other direction. Michael, played by Alan Howard, the lover, has a credit in the Lord of the Rings films. Was he A, Theoden, the king of Rohan? Was he the voice of the ring itself? Or C, did he play Radagast the Brown?
Did Radagast the Brown make an appearance in that movie?
He did. He shows up with quite a bit of bird poop in his beard. It is.
I'm recalling it now.
It's like one of those moments where you're like, yeah, Peter Jackson, you got that right. That is 100% what Radagast is like.
Radagast the Brown probably in like D&D would be a druid and not a wizard.
Yeah.
But the guy who played Theoden might have actually been in this movie as well, but it's not him. So I believe Alan Howard was the voice of the ring.
Correct. Yes. He played the voice of the ring.
I don't remember the ring having a voice. Is that the voice that's like, Frodo? Or is it sort of...
I believe so.
Is it that, or is it sort of like, there were 8 rings forged? But no, that's
a female voice. It's Kate Blanchett.
It's Kate Blanchett, you know. Weird. I didn't really realize that the ring had a voice.
Yeah. It was a fun little deep dive. It was fun.
Yeah.
I was trying to... I really wanted to see what other films Pup the Boy had been in. He doesn't have many other credits.
It's weird, because he also seems like he might be, like, rather anti-melanonic, too.
Yes.
You know? He seems like he might be... Are we still allowed to call people albinos? Is that word, like, kind of
I'm not sure.
merged into...
Listeners, let us know. Cancel us if we're wrong.
Cancel us if we're wrong. He might be a quote-unquote albino. Because he's stunning. His presence is stunning. I wonder if he had a career as a boy soprano. I mean, he has a tremendous voice, too. I also think that was one of the points I kind of wanted to make, too, which is, like, in addition to the curtains opening, the scaffolding... To me, another one of the clues of, like, you're watching a thing. It's like an opera, is him singing, you know. And then, of course, the other great clue is that amazing Rembrandt-looking painting that is behind them, you know, with all these men, who are basically depicting exactly what the thief,
I believe it's
Spica
called,
is doing.
I believe that painting's called The Burgermeisters. And yeah, same ideas, like power, food.
Burgermeisters would be a word meaning something like the merchants, I think, in Dutch, right? Like a burger is it's the same root as bourgeoisie, so sort of like the upper middle class merchants or something like that. But and that is how Spica fancies himself, and you know, he does have this kind of bizarre, not bizarre, it's very Brit, but he has a class yearning.
Yes, he does, for sure. He wants to be upper class, but doesn't know how to be.
Yeah. How did this film meet your expectations?
Whoa, what a question.
This is, I've replaced, are you going to watch this again? But you could also answer that. I think you already said that you would not watch it again.
I know. I mean, I could see watching it again as like, like, hey, do you want to watch something wild?
Do you want to traumatize your child?
This movie torpedoed my expectations. Like,
are you trying to break up with somebody? Perhaps you should perhaps screen this film.
Hey, babe, you want to cuddle and watch the cook, the thief, his wife, and her lover? It's like a.
I want our relationship to be like Spica and Georgina.
Yeah, it's a sensual foreign romp.
Yeah.
No, like this, like one of the things I am valuing about this experience was how my expectations were wildly inverted. Like, I really thought this was going to be kind of a like, I thought we were going to be in either like a comedy or tragedy of manners. Like, I was like, oh yeah, we're going to be in like the food world of like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Babette's Feast in England.
Right, yeah, exactly. Or like John Le Carre, but in a restaurant.
With an affair.
Yeah.
With an affair.
I know,
yeah,
I was really like...
John Le Carre in a restaurant.
I was like settling in. I was like, ooh, like this had an NC-17 rating. Like maybe things are going to be kind of hot. and I, like 30 minutes in, I was like, okay, I am back in like the Lower East Side, and I am going to Ontological Hysterical or the Worcester Group. Like, I am back in performance art world, and that's a part of my world that I love. But it wasn't. My expectations were very different. I'm very happy that I saw it, and I'm not going to be able to forget it.
I will just say that this was not as good as I remember it. I think I actually enjoyed it more. And I think part of the reason I enjoyed it more is that I was on the cusp of adulthood, and I think there was something thrilling about being like, I'm a grown-up now, and I can watch this weird movie. And I had never seen anything like it. It also... But I don't think it's a good story. I think all the virtues are sensual. And then you think about somebody... like Stanley Kubrick, or like the Coen brothers, who also do this sort of symmetry, or even like the very best of Wes Anderson, although very different filmmaker, but especially Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick's visuals, is particularly Barry Lyndon and The Shining, are every bit as stunning as this film, and he has something interesting to say. Yeah. But of course, he's a genius. So this is not genius. It's still a good, well-made, stunning film. It's a production, but it's not quite as good as I remembered it. And I remembered it being more foodie than this. It actually made me like not want to eat.
Oh yeah.
So there we are. Listener, next time I believe we are going to see a film that's going to make you want to eat, and that is Tampopo. By Juzo Itami, a Japanese production, I think also from around this time, like late 80s or early 1990s. Thanks so much for listening.
Upper Middle Brow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the boy sopranos and the shirtless soup cooks. Music is by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us at uppermiddlebrow.com.
You can also fill out our listener survey, and please, please, please do it. And don't just think that, like, because you're friends with us, you don't need to do it. We really need some survey results, so please fill it out, and we'll enter you in a drawing to win a Story Bluetooth speaker, unless you don't want us to. You don't have to take our Bluetooth. But please fill out the survey. We really need the information. To do that, you can go to uppermiddlebrow.com for a link to the survey, or check the show notes. We'll put the link in there, too.
As a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing projects. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Check them out. Get in touch if you want to talk about how we can help you with your project, big or small.
Cool. I'm going to go take my shirt off and cook some soup.
That sounds great. I'm going
and sing.
To...
Wash me, wash me. Wash me.
I'm going to go eat a book.
Paper cuts. Nasty way to go.
Makes me want to go watch the
cut.
YouTube video Werner Herzog eats his shoe.
Oh yeah, it's a great video.
It's amazing.
Yeah. In Cooks It in Duck Fat.
That's right. That's right. I forgot that.
He also says, I'm not, let me see if I can get my verb. I am not going to eat the soul. When you eat a chicken with your hands, you don't eat the bones. I feel like the same thing is justified in this case. I will eat the leather parts and the laces, but I will not eat the soul.
This is so German. I love it.
He's awesome. I love that guy.
Yeah.
Love that dude. He was on Fresh Air recently. This was fun, short and sweet.